Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bold Take Scouting Podcast. We're going to be recapping Alex's second mock draft, which just dropped on our Instagram yesterday, and it's a doozy, man. We're getting into the final, not the final stretch, but like really the stretch of the football calendar where we're really into the draft because the Super Bowl is behind us, and it's exciting, man.
Yeah, to kind of dig right into the draft, I think that the top four, I'd say, don't really have anything too crazy. Obviously, I have Daniels 2 and May 3. Uh, there's really no way to tell right now where teams are leaning. It seems like Daniels' stock has risen a little bit over the past, couple weeks, and May's, I don't want to say fallen, but it seems like Daniels may have overtaken him. And then just kind of the hiring of Cliff Kingsbury for me as the offensive coordinator makes it feel like Daniels might be a better fit for Washington, but I think things will probably start to get more clear as we get closer to the draft. So for right now, those two, in my opinion, are kind of interchangeable. And then I think if QB goes 1, 2, 3, the Cardinals run up that card, with Marvin Harrison's name on it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One question I have is about this scheme fit where Daniels might be a better fit for Cliff Kingsbury's offense in Washington than Drake May. I understand that May might be the more pro style, pro ready quarterback, but it feels silly to me to think that Daniels would be, the better fit in a spread because I think May would also play really well in a spread offense. I think he could really execute any offense you ask him to.
Yeah, I think where I was going to go with that is Kingsbury's experiences with Kyler Murray in
Mhm.
Arizona, and he was a really mobile quarterback, obviously. And Daniels is, while May's mobility, in my opinion, is underrated, Daniels is obviously a much better athlete. So we don't really have any idea what they're thinking in Washington right now. But I think that Kingsbury might be a little bit more enticed by a quarterback that's very mobile, as Daniels is.
That makes sense. So at pick 5, you've got Joe Alt to the Chargers. Do you think tackle's the way they're going to go, or do you think they're considering Brock Bowers at that pick as well, or maybe one of the receivers?
I mean, I think they have to consider the receivers in Bowers. Um, my reasoning for this pick is Ben Albright, one of the insiders on Twitter the other day, had stated that he's pretty much 99% sure that the Chargers would end up going offensive line. He hinted at maybe a trade down from number 5. Um, but that's, really why I ended up putting a tackle there. No one had really said anything else regarding the Chargers. Everyone just seems to assume that Bowers would be the pick. But to see someone that's, pretty reliable like Albright is to say, I'm 99% sure they go tackle, that really kind of pushed me to give them the best tackle in the draft.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. At pick 6, you kind of have your first stunner with J.J. McCarthy, the quarterback from Michigan, going off the board to the New York Giants. And it really seems like McCarthy is well liked in the NFL, and maybe more so than by fans. Maybe it's because he is the quarterback on the best team in the country, but it really seems like fans have it out for him and are really down on his NFL prospects. But I've always liked JJ McCarthy, maybe not quite this high, because I do think that it's a big leap of faith to expect him to go from a Michigan offense where they were running the ball as their priority and passing second to having to be a high volume passer in the NFL. But he shows you everything that you look for from a top quarterback prospect outside of that, so it makes sense.
Yeah, and I see the Giants fans saying, "Oh, well, we paid Daniel Jones a lot of money." There have been a handful of reporters and rumors come out that no, the Giants are looking for a quarterback.
Mhm.
I just read today that Tony Pauline actually came out and said that the Giants would love for one of the top quarterbacks to fall to them and would relish the opportunity to move up for one. So to me, that means they are strongly considering a quarterback in this draft, whether it's McCarthy or one of the top 3. But McCarthy's stock, like you mentioned, really seems to have skyrocketed up the boards. Um, within the past week or so. And guys like Dane Brugler, who are really reliable, have a lot of contacts in the NFL, have said, McCarthy's pretty much a top 12, top 10 lock. So I think we'll start to see him a lot higher in mock drafts. And I just really wanted to get ahead of that with having some of that information.
Yeah, absolutely. At number 7, we've got Malik Neighbors going off the board to Tennessee. It really seems like he's a top 10 lock at this point, really highly thought of. And there's some reports that he's even really close to Marvin Harrison in some teams' eyes. What made you go with him, though, ahead of an offensive tackle, which is a huge need for Tennessee?
Yeah, I think if Alt's there, Alt's the pick at 7. Obviously, I had him going at 5. And just kind of looking at where everyone else seems to have offensive linemen go, the only consistent play tackle that has been mocked, relatively close to the top 10 has been Fuaga at 10 to the Jets. And his arm length, while I think it's fine to play tackle, is similar to Peter Skoronski, who they took and immediately moved him into guard. So there's a part of me that thinks they wouldn't want to take another player with those measurements, knowing that they just moved him into guard. And maybe with a change in regime, a new head coach, they bump him back out to tackle. And I'm wrong with that, but I can't see them taking 2 guys that they value as guards highly in the first round. Skoronski was 11th last year. Fuaga, if they see him as a guard because he has the same measurements as Skoronski, I can't see them taking him 7th overall. So then at that point, it just became best player available, and they do have a need at wide receiver. So.
Yeah, it's a pretty big need as well. I mean, they have not recovered from trading away A.J. Brown. Treylon Burks has not panned out the way they thought, the way we thought. So it makes a lot of sense. And as you said, it's going to be really interesting to see which offensive tackles emerge as top 10 guys, because Joe Alt has consistently been mocked that high. But other than that, Talise Fuaga could go that high. We could see Amarius Mims climb that high. We could see Tyler Guyton climb that high. Obviously, Olu Fashanu and J.C. Latham have been established for a while and are still in that conversation. But wow, it's really, really difficult to predict how these top 6 guys are going to go. So it'll be interesting.
I did contemplate putting Mims there at 7, but just right now it seemed too high, because again, he's started 13 games in his entire collegiate career. So I wouldn't feel comfortable putting him that high unless we start to hear some rumblings about that. But that's entirely possible with his athletic ability and his size, and the dominance that he showed at Georgia. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with these offensive tackles, and maybe it gets a little clearer, maybe it gets a little bit murkier as we go on.
Yeah, our Instagram followers were not ready for you to mock Amarius Mims at number 7.
No, I figured McCarthy Mims back-to-back at 6 and 7 would be too much.
Yeah, maybe. Well, so your next few picks to round out the top 10 are Dallas Turner, the edge from Alabama, heading to the Falcons at 8. Rome Odunze, the wide receiver from Washington, heading to the Bears at 9. And Talise Fuaga, the tackle, head from Oregon State, heading to the Jets, who really seem to be zoned in on a tackle. And these picks make sense. The Falcons are missing out on the top quarterbacks. They go edge, and they always have an edge need. And the Bears, giving Odunze a fantastic young receiver for Caleb Williams makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think these picks are kind of what we see a lot. I really like the Bears getting Caleb Williams, a really good wide receiver, and Odunze. The Jets, I think, regardless, whatever tackle is available, I think they go tackle there for the Jets. So we'll pull up the picks 11 through 21.
It feels like the Jets are always picking a tackle, doesn't it? Or always in
like
need.
They always have a tackle need, and that's because they do.
Yeah.
So I think 11, kind of a name that's risen kind of the week of the Senior Bowl, not for his performance at the Senior Bowl because he didn't participate, but all of a sudden he seemed to shoot up draft boards. And Tony Pauline has been very strong in stating that Murphy will go top 15, and the Vikings have had a lot of
Mhm.
interest in Brian Murphy. So again, it's just a pick that makes sense. Trying to connect the dots as best as we can, and that is seemed to work out pretty well in the past for mock drafts. So I'm not really gonna change how I do a mock draft now. So connecting the dots there, but 11 would be a little bit high for Murphy for my liking, but it seems like the NFL really values him pretty highly.
Yeah, the rise of Byron Murphy has been really interesting because he's a guy who, when we were scouting him in preparation for the college football playoff, the talk of the town was that he was maybe a second round, maybe even third round guy, but now it really seems like he's solidified himself in that mid first round range. I think it follows the trend of some of these more undersized pass rushers being valued highly because they really are able to rush the passer, and they're forgiven a little bit for getting washed out at times in the run. Maybe Aaron Donald paved the way for some of these guys, but it is interesting, and he is a good scheme fit in Minnesota. Your next few picks, you've got Jared Verse at number 12 going to the Broncos, Terrion Arnold at 13 going to the Raiders. I think this is probably his floor, and Brock Bowers going to the Saints at 14. What a steal that would be.
Yeah, I think, Verse and Arnold, guys that you consistently see mocked there. I think for me, I've only ever seen Bowers mocked at 5 to the Chargers and then 15 to the Colts. And I just thought it was an interesting fit. The Colts have some talent at wide
Well,
receiver.
this
Or
is 14 to the
the
Saints.
Saints, sorry. The Saints have some talent at wide receiver, but it still seems like they need some more pass catchers, and they're kind of locked in with Derek Carr. So I figured Bowers, could be an option there. They've had a history of some really good tight ends, and they haven't had one in a couple of years since Jimmy Graham. So, I felt like it was an interesting pick to make. And I really like the fit of Quinyon Mitchell to the Colts at 15. They need a cornerback. They really like guys that test really well and measure really well. Mitchell's going to do that. He's really fast, really physical, and his stock soared after the Senior Bowl. So I think he's a guy that round one lock at this point, and I think it could be between him and Arnold for cornerback 1. Obviously, I have Arnold going 2 picks before, but I've seen people say that Mitchell could end up being the first corner off the board.
Yeah, I honestly would understand that. I was hesitant about Quinyon Mitchell heading into the Senior Bowl because he's a fantastic athlete, but he primarily played off coverage at Toledo, and so we never really saw him play press and have to flip his hips and mirror a receiver right from the line of scrimmage, and he did that incredibly at the Senior Bowl. So I'm going to be pushing Mitchell up highly on my cornerback board, and I think he's going to end up either 1 or 2 for me because even though it still is a good bit of projection, I'm just not in love with this corner class. I feel like there's a lot of guys that are worth borderline first round picks, but nobody really for me that I'd be thrilled about mid first round. So it'll be interesting. They'll probably get pushed up the board because it's an important position. And moving on at number 16, you've got Laiatu Latu, the edge from UCLA. He's such a good player. He really just needs to have those medicals check out because of that retirement that he had due to a neck injury at Washington, but he did get back on track and played great at UCLA after that. At 17, you've got Nate Wiggins going to cornerback from Clemson to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They might be looking at corner, maybe a receiver as well, or an offensive tackle. And the Bengals at 18 getting Olu Fashanu, the tackle from Penn State, who really you wouldn't expect to fall this far, and neither would you your next pick, J.C. Latham, offensive tackle going from Alabama, going to the Rams. So what led you to drop Fashanu and Latham this far in your mock draft?
It really just seems like that's where the NFL values both of them. I would take them higher than 18 and 19. I think they're both really good players. But it seems like Latham, maybe only being a right tackle is what's pushing him down boards a little bit, which I feel like in this day in the NFL, you need a really good right tackle and a really good left tackle. So if you can get one of them, you take them regardless of, whichever side they play on. Fashanu, it just seems like teams are a little bit wary. his tape wasn't as good in 2023 as it was in
Yeah.
2022. And we often see that when players decline in their tape a little bit, they seem to just slide down boards, and then sometimes it doesn't even really matter. They pick it back up in the NFL. I did want to touch on the Jaguars a little bit. I considered Brian Thomas, the wide receiver from LSU. I really, really like him as a player. And I couldn't really make him fit. I had been listening to PFF's a couple of the guys on PFF. They were talking about their mock draft. And they mentioned how the Jaguars had been strongly considering and looking at all the top corners in the draft. And the reason I bring that up is because Mike Renner mentioned that he went to school with Shad Khan's son. So that's kind of an interesting nugget. And again, putting the pieces together, connecting the dots. So I decided I'd give them a cornerback. But I don't think there's any too big surprises here for the middle part of round one.
Yep. And you've got at number 20, you've got the Steelers going Amarius Mims, which honestly, I think when it's all said and done, he's going to end up going earlier. But there are so many tackles, as we alluded to, and probably even a couple of these guys are going to fall and they're going to end up being real steals. And at number 21, there's an interior offensive lineman, Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon, going to which I forget which team it was at 21.
The Dolphins.
The Dolphins. That makes a lot of sense. They've got several free agents on that offensive line, and Jackson Powers Johnson was a guy who I already thought was a first rounder heading into the Senior Bowl, and he absolutely solidified that spot. And so now at 22, you've got Cooper DeJean, the cornerback, going to the Philadelphia Eagles. I like this pick because they really need to shore up that secondary, and he's so versatile. I don't really view him as a first-round man cover talent because he's got some tightness in his hips that makes him struggle to stay connected to the receiver, but he's so versatile and such a playmaker that I think he makes up for it by just the amount of positive plays he's going to make for you. And he's excellent against the run as well.
Yeah, he's like you mentioned, really versatile player in a team that kind of needs all over that secondary. You just really take him in whichever position he performs best at in camp. I think you plug him in there, and he's a day one starter for you.
Yep. At 23, you've got the Houston Texans drafting Braylon Trice, the edge from Washington, who I really love. I'm not sure that I've been seeing him too often in first round mocks. So what led you to put Trice this high?
Yeah, in my opinion, he was kind of the next edge guy available. There's been some talk about the Texans potentially losing Jonathan Greenard to free agency.
Yeah.
Obviously, if they re-sign him, I won't have them taking an edge in round one. But it just seems like he'll be getting paid a lot. And, with Will Anderson, really being the top edge rushing rookie last year, they might be comfortable letting him go and potentially taking another one this year. So he was the next one on my board. There's always some surprises in the final third of the first round. So he's a guy that I feel like might, end up getting pushed up to that late round one range.
Yeah, that makes sense. At 24, you have the Cowboys drafting Brian Thomas Jr. Now that would be a really fun pick, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I just feel like the Cowboys, watching them play in the playoffs, getting beat by the Packers, they need someone other than CeeDee Lamb that can consistently get open and catch the ball and make some plays. And Brian Thomas can definitely do that for them. And he was a really good wide receiver too at LSU. I think he has the potential to be a wide receiver one. But I mean, I think he would be one of the best wide receiver twos in the NFL in very short time if he went to Dallas.
Mm-hmm. Your next few picks, you've got Tyler Guyton, tackle from Oklahoma, going to the Packers. He might end up going higher. He's very inexperienced, but he's 6'7" and just has a ridiculous package of physical traits that NFL teams are really going to want to bank on. 26, the Bucs, who might be looking for a cornerback, they go Kool-Aid McKinstry, Terrion Arnold's teammate at Alabama, who once was thought of as, better prospect than Arnold, but it seems like now NFL teams have reached a consensus that Arnold is 1 and McKinstry is 2 out of Alabama. And 27, you've got the Arizona Cardinals with their second first round pick, going Troy Fautanu, the offensive lineman from Washington who played left tackle for the Huskies, but could slot in either at tackle or at guard in the NFL. There seems to be some varying opinions on that.
Yeah, I think Guyton at 25 makes a lot of sense. The Packers like kind of developmental offensive tackles, offensive linemen in general. And Guyton kind of fits that mold. Like you mentioned, he's raw, but he has all the traits. He kind of makes that fit there that they might be, moving on from some of their tackles right now. So, bringing in the next crop of offensive linemen might be important. Tampa Bay, they need a cornerback. Kool-Aid was the best guy on left on my board. I think we did kind of hint at the fact that Kool-Aid might end up being behind Arnold in our playoff preview. So that was pretty interesting to see that kind of catch fire a little bit after that. And Fautanu, like you mentioned, a guy that could probably play guard or tackle in the NFL. I think the Cardinals still have some needs on their offensive line to shore up. Obviously, they drafted Paris Johnson last year, who has been really solid for them. But I think that versatility that Fontenot brings would be beneficial for them. And again, they can slot him in wherever they need him.
Mm-hmm. Next few picks, you've got the Buffalo Bills picking Jerzon Newton, defensive tackle from Illinois, who I really like. He's such a skilled pass rusher, and I think he is maybe a better prospect than Byron Murphy, but maybe the NFL doesn't view it the same way. At 29, the big winner of the Senior Bowl week, Darius Robinson, who has really skyrocketed up at boards, it seems like, going to the Detroit Lions. And at 30, his teammate at Missouri, Ennis Rakestraw Jr., the cornerback, going to the Baltimore Ravens. I really like Rakestraw. Such a competitive, physical cornerback.
Yeah, Newton at 28 to the Bills, in my opinion, seems a little bit low. I value him higher than that. It doesn't necessarily seem like the NFL does. And the Bills, really looking at their roster, besides another wide receiver, don't have a ton of needs. So I just had them going best player available there. And then I think Robinson can help improve a Lions defensive line that wasn't great against the run this year. He's versatile, could play edge, could, rotate and move inside once in a while as well. So kind of guy that kind of fits what the Lions could be looking for. And then Rakestraw just kind of shoring up that Ravens secondary that, seemed to get decimated by injuries a little bit last year, but the Ravens, another team that don't have a lot of needs.
Yeah, the Lions picked a similar profile with Josh Paschal last year, so it would kind of fit that billing. At 31, you've got the 49ers going Chop Robinson, the edge rusher from Penn State with plenty of juice, and 32, a guy that we keep mocking the first round because he's really flying under the radar, but he's a good player with NFL bloodlines as well, and that's Chris Jenkins, the D tackle from Michigan.
Yeah, Robinson, he's really quick off the edge. I don't think he's necessarily put it all together yet, in my opinion, as an edge rusher, but he has a lot of traits. I think, we think about the 49ers defensive line being a really strong position group, but a lot of their guys are free agents this year. Obviously, they traded for Chase Young. He's going to be a free agent. Javon Kinlaw, I know he's a defensive tackle. He'll also be a free agent. So I could see them bringing in some fresh blood along that defensive line. And then Chris Jenkins, again, this pick is assuming that Chris Jones leaves in free agency. Obviously, if they re-sign Chris Jones, I could see them going elsewhere at 32. But, the Super Bowl champs retooling at the defensive line that has shown that it's an extremely important position for all 32 teams, but they've really won some games the past couple of years with disruptive players from the interior.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see if they might target cornerback, though, if L'Jarius Sneed ends up getting paid elsewhere.
Yeah, that could totally happen as well. I think there's a lot of cornerbacks going in round one this year, a lot of offensive tackles going in round one this year. But yeah, it'll be really interesting these next, couple months to see what happens. I'm sure things will get a little bit clearer as we go on. Things will also get a little bit murkier as we go on as well. Not to put you on the spot, any guys that I don't have in this first round that you either see almost as either a sleeper to go in round one or a guy that you think will rise throughout the process and end up in round one conversation?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Let me just pull up my mini board right now just to get an eye on who you might have left out of the conversation. Um, I could see I could see Jordan Morgan going in round one. I know there's a lot of tackles, but it seems like there's a group that are going to be gone by the early 20s. So he's the guy who I could see sliding in there. One guy who it'd be really interesting to see him go round one is Lad McConkey. I don't know if he's
Yeah.
going to go quite that high, but I really like him. I think he's such a good athlete and a terrific route runner, and I wouldn't be shocked if that happened.
Yeah, I mean, we saw his route running at the Senior Bowl. It was outstanding. One guy that I saw kind of mentioned, again, by Tony Pauling, he actually came out with a mock um, earlier today,
Yeah,
and
earlier
he
today.
mentioned that Kingsley Suama Matia
Mm.
could end up going the end of the first round as well. Not a guy that I see as a first round talent. Um, but again, tackles are really important. There's a lot of good ones. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him left out. But if Tony Pauline's saying it, it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And credit to you for the pronunciation there.
um, I think that's it.
Mhm.
There were a couple things that I definitely wanted to make sure I cleared up and kind of provided some rationale for. So I think, once in a while, it's always good to do that with the mock instead of just, bringing it up. So thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for listening. Be sure to stay tuned for all our draft content coming this draft season. And we'll be back with another episode soon.